Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
So, this actually happened about 2 hours ago. I, a 26-year-old female, and my boyfriend 36 and male, decided to go to the store to get oil. We have to go out 45 minutes just to get this, out in a bad part of the city. But it's the only European store that has the actual stuff that I grew up with eating. My family and I are from the Ukraine, but we live in the US. And it's difficult finding authentic places that have exactly what we had. And this is the only place I found that has it down to the exact brand. As we are driving, we are on a 3-lane road, which we need to get into one of those midsection U-turn types of lanes. We get into our left turn lane, and a black car blitzes from the far right lane through the middle lane to cut us off at the left lane, which my boyfriend and I are like, "What the hell?" And then they stop at a green light for the U-turn. My boyfriend honks twice in a nice way in case they were on their phone to go, since it's our green. They go forward and we go to the parking lot directly on our right to the store that we need to go to. The car in front of us, which was now in the far left lane, goes through another 2 lanes and drives onto the sidewalk to go into the parking lot that we were going into, and then rides nearly on our bumper, pressing their horn the entire time that we drove. My boyfriend eventually decided to stop a few feet further than the store instead of parking at it. And at that point, I realized that his camera was not on. I can't remember the name in English, but it's a camera that records in front and back as you drive. I tap it since usually it starts recording when it feels motion. But it didn't turn on, and we realize that it's somehow disconnected to his car. As he's trying to get the camera plugged back into his car, the black car pulls up, and I see 3 guys looking 18 to 20 in there. All 3 are African American. They roll their window down, and the driver reaches for something that they're about to take out, and I'm just screaming at my boyfriend, "Just drive! Go! Just go!" And my boyfriend slammed onto the gas pedal, and we drive off and the black car does too. My boyfriend suddenly began doing donuts in the parking lot to get their car to back off while I'm screaming, "Oh God, oh God, the police! Let's call the police! I need to call the police!" And I managed to dial 911 as he was doing his last donut and then suddenly began driving out of the parking lot. The black car was still chasing us out as I finally got an answer, and when police asked where we were, I blanked out and I stuttered in panic that we were currently being chased, and my boyfriend yelled out what road we were passing. He used to do Uber for 7 years and knows every street name by heart. Those guys kept going after us until we were about 3 to 4 blocks away from the police station, and we stayed on the line, and they probably realized that we were going, and then they swerved to a random road on our left. At some point, we got disconnected, but the officer called me right back and stayed with us as we pulled into the station. We explained what happened, and the officer was nice. He offered to escort us back to the store, following our car in case the guys were still there. We showed the skid marks, and the officer said nice as a joke, and it was all good. He did paperwork as we grabbed the sunflower oil that I wanted, and I had my boyfriend try authentic Slavic ice cream for the first time, which he agrees is 100% better than American. And then we decided to cut our day short, thanked the officer, and then went home. My boyfriend said that he is amazed at how quickly I made all the right decisions, and was surprised that I even called the police because he's aware that I have a history of being sexually assaulted by 2 on-duty officers 4 years ago and I have been too terrified to call or speak to officers since then. But I was so terrified of getting shot, and my only priority was to have police over so my boyfriend is safe and nothing happens to him. I was so terrified that my chest hurt, and I'm so happy that we are safe. My boyfriend is now laughing and saying that he can now prove that front-wheel Dodge cars can do great donuts. I genuinely hope that I never see or run into those three guys ever again. So let's never meet again. Hi. So as the title says, I'm 21. I'm not sure if gender matters, but I am a female. Now, this might sound maybe a tad bit overdramatic since it's been years since this incident has happened that had caused this fear. But I just want to get it off my chest as someone who doesn't really talk about it. I personally find this encounter super creepy, especially getting older and being able to look back on it. I've learned a lot from it, so maybe posting what happened could either guide others to stay alert that it could happen to them, or even know the signs. I live in rural Ohio, so there's not much that goes on here. We don't live in the best area either, with lots of druggies and pedos. Just if you have kids, you really shouldn't live around here basically. But when I was younger, we didn't really worry much about anything happening to us or questionable things due to the fact that our family was known in this area. My grandpa was a known cop for many years and was extremely respected, and people knew that he would fight over us. So nobody really messed with us. We also lived around multiple other children our age. It wasn't uncommon to let your kids run around by themselves just before nighttime, because our neighborhood essentially relied on each other and the other kids to keep each other safe, and it worked for the most part. We knew what people to stay away from, and they knew to stay away from us as well. When I was in middle school, the bus ran at 7 a.m., and we would have to be at the end of our long driveway by 7 a.m. to catch the bus on time. And this happened during winter, and our bus tended to be late sometimes. It would reach us around 7:05 or 7:15 the latest. But we made sure to be out at 7 a.m. just in case that they were on time. It was me and my two cousins. One was 4 years younger than me, and the other was a year older, but we were in the same grade. The road is straight where our driveway is, so cars come by multiple times, and you would be able to see if a car was slowing down and such, and they'd see us as well. We were always told not to stand by the end of the driveway, and always keep a distance, so if a drunk driver or whatever happened to swerve, we would be okay for the most part. We were at the age where me and my cousin, who was in the same grade as me, essentially babysat the younger cousin, and we didn't have an adult accompany us at the end of the driveway anymore. It was super cold that day, and the sun was just coming up, and we were annoyed because the bus was late while we were waiting in the cold. But I noticed the car was coming, and again, this happened all the time, so it wasn't like I was checking it out or anything. I just noticed it and went back to listening to music on my phone. I then hear a loud brake sound, so I look up, and the car is in front of our driveway, now fully stopped. The man in the car was waving his hands towards us to signal us to come closer to him, and of course, I refused, and I was frozen in spot because this never happened before. He could tell that we were obviously shaken by this, and he said that he worked for a school but was lost, and he just got hired. He named a school that was an hour away. Remind you, it's past 7 a.m. at this point, and I immediately knew that he was lying. It didn't make sense to me why he would be lost at a job that he said he already got. Plus, it being this late, I'd think he would already be at the school. No way that he would be lost to the point that he's an hour away from the district and signaling children to his car the way he did if he was a teacher at all. It also made no sense to me logically how he would be lost from a job that he obviously had to go in to get hired for. And yes, this was before Zoom and all of these things happened, I'm pretty sure. I immediately said that I'm going to get an adult, and he clearly panicked and said that it wasn't necessary. He just wanted us to get closer and show him where to go. I just pointed straight. I truly don't know the direction to the district, but that was not my main focus, honestly. I told him to go straight, and he ignored me. My little cousin was moving towards his car, and I grabbed him by his hair and he kept by me. And I refused to let go of his head. I'm shaking, and I'm trying not to show I'm scared because I don't know what's about to happen. The driveway is a long one as well, but I truly didn't feel safe turning my back on him. I have my other hand on my phone, and I am shaking, so I'm struggling with gloves on, but I am able to call my mom, and thank God, she answers. She usually would ignore my calls and be on the phone with her boyfriend. The guy then gets out of his car when he sees that I'm on my phone with someone, and I start immediately sobbing and telling my mom that there's a man out here, and I think he's going to hurt us. She comes out running, and the second she gets closer and he sees her, he bolts back to his car and then dashes away. A car that was around the corner of the road also dashed away as well. Now, looking back, it's even more scary since if it was just someone who needed to get past the said car that was in the middle of the road by our driveway, they would have just either honked or gone on the other lane to pass them. They definitely also saw the entire thing and didn't get out of their car to help us or anything. So, it makes sense that they were also in on this entire situation. I'm forced to go to school that day, and my mom calls the cops, and when I get home, I found out even more horrible news that just made me realize that my gut feeling was correct. My mom told them the car and how it looked and such, and they found an abandoned car that matched her description just up the road, so they found who it belonged to, and eventually found out that he wasn't the school teacher. He worked on the barges, and the cops said that they thought it dealt with sex trafficking from the looks of it, and they didn't even catch him since they've already left on the boat or whatever. Who knows what would have happened if he got one of us? I assumed we would have been on that boat and horrible things would have happened. It still pisses me off that he was never caught and possibly other kids were victims of his. It's truly terrifying, and to this day, I refuse to go near the road. I still have recurring nightmares of it. I'm always on alert now too, which I most definitely should have been more alert back then, but I was just a kid, and I clearly didn't realize how it would have affected me in real time. It was autumn in 2015, and I was 23 years old. I am now 31. During that time, I lived in Lancaster as I was studying at Lancaster University. For those who may not be familiar, it is a small and rather quaint town in the north of England. As a student, you could either live at the university campus or in private accommodation in the town. I had decided to live in a newly built renovated apartment in a nice side of town, and yes, it was expensive. I had already been studying for 2 years, and I had reached my 3rd year. By this time, I had grown accustomed to the layout of the town, and I felt comfortable and safe living there semi-independently. I was with 2 other friends who were also studying at the university. Since my 1st year, I had decided to improve my fitness by taking nightly runs around either the campus or the town. As we were living in the town center by my 3rd year, I would run either with my housemate or alone. Now, one important thing to note about Lancaster, which will be important later, is that it has quite a large residential area that is hilly and far removed from the bustling center, which at that time was a hub for the students or the local northern folk. Occasionally, I would run with my housemate. However, I preferred to run alone and listen to some kind of heavy metal. I was a big fan of Deftones during that period. On this particular day, as I said, a chilly autumnal evening, I had decided to run alone. It was about 8 p.m. and I had my earphones in. I had started to run up to the more isolated district that led up to a very pretty residential area and a large green called Williamson Park. It had a butterfly museum at the top of the hill. Next to the park was a very large graveyard, the kind that is miles wide and had different areas. There were large yew trees, crumbling graves, a crypt in the center overrun with leaves and ivy. What was especially creepy about this particular cemetery was that it had the ruin of an old mental asylum or hospital at the other side. You could actually sneak in if you walked across the width of the cemetery and then crawled through a small hole in the fence that led to asylum grounds. This was not advised though, as guard dogs roamed the derelict building. It was not a place that you wanted to be during the night. So, I had made my way past Williamson Park and up to the entrance of the graveyard. Immediately, my eye was drawn to something small standing at the imposing gates of the graveyard. They were kind of tall, black iron gates that were at the bottom of a little winding path. I felt a little apprehensive, but it wasn't unusual to see people walking their dogs and etc. out of the graveyard. So, I started to slow my pace to a walk in the direction of that shape. As I drew nearer, I realized that the shape was a child around 9 to 10 years old, and they were running towards me frantically. They looked panicked and scared, and I think they were crying. I vividly remember that the girl was not wearing a coat, only a thin dress that would not be suitable for the harsh autumn. She asked me if I could help her. She was desperate and seemed to be frightened of something. She kept looking back into the graveyard, which at this point was totally pitch black beyond the gates. I mean, there was absolutely no light beyond the path. As the graveyard was quite large, it was chilling to see the depth of blackness and a vulnerable child standing at the mouth of the gate helpless. I don't recall what the girl said exactly, but I then offered to call the local police. I had typed 999 into my phone and I had it on loudspeaker. But the girl immediately changed. She was not happy about the fact that I was calling the police, and that was clear. She stopped crying and she seemed angry, almost demanding, and insisted that she did not need the police to help. I reassured her that it was best to inform the police, and I even offered to walk her to the station, which was about 20 minutes back down the hill. Well, this is where the story gets weird and a little terrifying. The girl turned and ran back into the graveyard. She ran directly through the gates into the eerie blackness. She didn't turn back, just ran as quickly as possible until she had completely disappeared from sight. It was then totally silent. I was spooked beyond belief, now standing in a darkened street, completely alone, and I had so many questions. Who was that girl? Why was she alone? Why was she scared of the police? Why wasn't she frightened of the dark? Who might she be running to or from? I turned and I ran all the way back down the hill, not stopping until I had reached a well-lit built-up area. Safe to say, I didn't run on my own at night again. Anyway, it's a mystery that has plagued me ever since. So, little girl in the graveyard, let's definitely not meet again. There are moments in life that you wish never happened, memories you wish you could erase, yet they cling to you like shadows. This is a story of one such shadow, a story that shaped my life in ways that I wish it hadn't. It's not for the faint of heart, but I believe that sharing it might help others understand that they are not alone. I met Jeremiah during my freshman year of high school. We started dating at the beginning of my sophomore year, and we were together until graduation. On the surface, we seemed like a typical pair of shy teenagers, lost in our own world of holding hands and shared secrets. But what the world saw was merely a facade. Behind closed doors, Jeremiah's demeanor was far from loving. He was controlling, he was manipulative, those behaviors that slowly escalated into physical and sexual abuse. My home life wasn't much better. My parents' constant arguments taught me all the wrong lessons about love. So, when Jeremiah's treatment mirrored their aggression, I mistakenly believed that it was normal. I endured his behavior, convinced that this was what relationships were supposed to be. The abuse continued for over a year and a half, until one spring break during my senior year, I sought refuge at my grandmother's house, craving a break from Jeremiah. And although I didn't reveal the real reason for my visit, my grandmother saw a bruise on my inner thigh. When she gently asked about it, I broke down and I told her everything. She was shocked and horrified, but also resolute in her advice. I needed to leave Jeremiah. With her support, I returned from spring break determined to end things. When Jeremiah visited my house, I insisted that we stay in the living room, away from the privacy of my room, where his control often unfolded. As the evening wore on, I mustered the courage to tell him that we needed a break. I watched anger flash across his face, but with my mom in the next room, he restrained himself from his usual violent reaction. And after he left, he didn't leave me alone. Notes, phone calls, and letters filled with alternating declarations of love and threats of regret followed. His behavior escalated to throwing a brick through my window and a desperate plea attached to it saying, "I love you, and I would die without you." That reckless act was his undoing. My father called the cops, and Jeremiah was arrested. And for the first time ever, I felt relief, and I thought that it was over. I moved on, graduated high school, and I embraced college life with my grandparents supporting me every step of the way. For a decade, I lived independently. I built a career. I even started a serious relationship with a wonderful guy. I thought that I had left my past behind and that I had healed from the trauma that once consumed me. But shadows have a way of lurking, waiting for the right moment to re-emerge. One day, out of the blue, I received a phone call from an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered it, and as soon as I heard, "Hey, it's Jeremiah," my blood ran cold. He sounded disturbingly cheerful, as if the years and his arrest had never happened. He was calling to ask if I would be a reference for a job, a request that absolutely made my skin crawl. I wrapped up the call quickly, shaken to my core, and my boyfriend, bless him, was supportive and advised me to change my number and ignore unknown calls. It was a sound plan, but it wasn't enough to prepare me for what happened next. About a week later, I walked into my office and I saw him sitting in the lobby. My heart stopped. He stood, smiling, and hugged me before I could react. I felt paralyzed, trapped in a nightmare, and I thought that I had escaped. His words were a chilling echo of the past, filled with talk of old times and excitement about the possibility of working together. He had come for an interview in my department. The moment he mentioned old times, I pulled away and I fled to my manager's office. I poured out my story, desperate for help. The manager listened, but his response was legalistic, asking if I had a restraining order. I knew then that he wouldn't stop Jeremiah from joining the team. Well, that was my last day at the company. I knew Jeremiah's presence there wasn't coincidence. It was calculated. He had found my number, my workplace, and aimed to re-enter my life. And I quit without notice and changed my number immediately. I was a bit sad to leave my job, but looking for another job is so much better than working with Jeremiah. I am living more cautiously now, but I refuse to let fear control me. Should Jeremiah ever attempt to re-emerge, I'll be ready. So, Jeremiah, wherever you are, let's never meet again. This happened when I was in college. As I've said in some of my previous stories, that was a period in my life where just a lot of creepy shit happened to me. I don't really know what I was doing to attract so many weirdos at that time of my life, but I probably should have been evaluating my life choices a little more closely. But anyway, on to the story. During college, I worked as a tutor at school, but on the weekends, I would sometimes babysit for family friends. One of the kids was actually old enough that he didn't need a babysitter, we'll call him Chris, but he wasn't old enough to watch the younger kid, we'll call him Kevin. Thus, my presence on the night that would prove to be honestly terrifying as hell. I don't know. Maybe you won't think it's as bad as I felt like it was, but we will see. Okay, so anyway, I was babysitting for this family one Saturday night. The parents didn't usually stay out too late, getting home at like 10 p.m. most nights, or earlier even, when I babysat for their monthly date night. But this particular night was a special situation. I can't exactly remember the circumstances of it now, but I mean, I was 19 and I could stay out past 10 p.m. They figured that they would be home by 1 a.m. They said that I was welcome to spend the night, but I have already decided that that would not be happening. That house honestly had a super weird vibe. It was kind of isolated, and they had all these old buildings on the property, some sheds, a gigantic barn, and etc. Maybe I've watched too many horror movies, but all I could think was that there were so many places for people to hide in those buildings. Plus, the house was really old too, and those always freak me out because, ghost. So, I would not be spending the night, that was for sure. I was babysitting the kids, and Kevin wanted me to go help him find something in the basement. He had all these costumes that he used to like to dress up in. Once, he scared the absolute shit out of me when he came up behind me in the dark wearing an ultra-realistic soldier costume, carrying a replica musket that I would have sworn was real, but turned out that it wasn't. I nearly lost my shit that night. The basement was the second creepiest part of the house. The creepiest was the attic, obviously, because attics are terrifying. So, if he would have asked me to go up there, it would have been a hard no. It wasn't fully finished and was really big with lots of corners and turns and hallways and shit, with a bunch of different rooms. It was actually my first time going beyond the stairway, and I kept thinking that if I had been aware of just how scary this basement was, there was no way in hell that I would be babysitting in this house. But I, of course, didn't want to look like a wimp in front of a child. So I went with Kevin to his costume area, which was kind of deep into the basement because, of course, it was. As we were looking for the costume, well, Kevin was looking, and I was just there, questioning my life choices that had led me at that moment. We suddenly heard noises that can only be described as footstep-like upstairs. At first, I just said that it must be Chris. But then Chris was just suddenly in the doorway, scaring the fucking hell out of me. Seriously, I had no idea where the hell he came from, and he was like, "That's not me." I remember this moment vividly. The three of us standing near this closet, filled with various costumes, of varying creepiness in this tiny room, in a super sketchy basement, listening to what we thought were footsteps upstairs. "Well, this is how we die," I thought, weirdly kind of immediately at peace with it. But that only lasted a second before I thought, "Nah, fuck that shit." And I looked around for a weapon. This is where watching too many horror movies actually came in handy. Of course, there was nothing because I was in a child's playroom, and the rest of the basement had little within it, apart from like a washer and dryer, which would make a poor weapon unless I could somehow push it onto someone, which seemed unlikely to happen in this particular situation. In the end, I just settled on this random crowbar. For real, it was just lying on the floor, and neither the kid knew why. I just can't express how creepy this basement was. I was prepared to meet our fate while considering just how much of a risk I was willing to take just to keep these kids safe. It was at that moment that I realized something. The dog wasn't barking. The family had this golden retriever named Lily who would bark at everything, and she wasn't barking. So I rationalized the sounds as just the noises that an old house would make. Plus, I realized that when we heard the noises, we weren't actually under the house itself based on the layout of the basement. We were under the porch. So, even if there was someone, it wasn't anyone in the actual house. It could have been anyone, a delivery driver being the most likely explanation. I felt a lot better, but you bet your ass that I kept that crowbar. So the kids and I went upstairs, where we found Lily knocked out. Not knocked out like someone knocked her out. She was just zonked, like she jolted awake when I touched her, because she's been sleeping that soundly. I actually thought that she was dead at first, because that was the way this night was going. And once upstairs, I went to the porch and very cautiously opened the door to look for a possible package. It was winter, so it got dark early, meaning it was feasible that a delivery driver would still be working after the sun went down. But naturally, there was no package. Of course there wasn't, right? I wouldn't be posting it here if that's how the story ended. So anyway, by this point, I was stressed the hell out. The kids were over it. While they were playing video games, I was Googling the crime rates in this town. And all of a sudden, Lily perked up and started barking like a maniac. And a second later, I heard a knock on the door. I just could not catch a fucking break this night. With my crowbar in hand, I walked to the door and I could see through the frosted window in the door that someone was standing there. I couldn't make out their features, but someone was there. Since I'm not a total dumbass, I didn't open the door, but I asked through the window who it was. The man on the other side of the door said that they had a pizza delivery. You already know what I'm about to say. We did not order a pizza. This was before every kid had a cell phone, so the boys couldn't have ordered one. Plus, they had been totally dead to the world while they played video games. And if the parents had ordered pizza, they would have told me. So naturally, I again was prepared to fight for my life. I gripped the crowbar and I told the guy that we hadn't ordered a pizza. I thought for sure he was going to insist and try to get me to open the door, but surprisingly he didn't. He just said, sorry, my mistake." And then he turned and left. At this point, I had a lot of questions, as one would when facing a series of unusual events in a creepy house in the middle of nowhere. So as I saw the guy walk off the porch through the frosted window, I opened the door just slightly. I wanted to see this guy, in case I needed to identify him out of a lineup or something eventually. But by the time that I opened the door, he was walking away, so I only saw his back. But I immediately noticed two strange things. I didn't see a pizza in his hands, and I didn't see his car. The latter, I could rationalize because he might have parked on the street, which would have been strange since they had a large horseshoe-shaped driveway. But just maybe. But there was no pizza. I guess technically it might have just been blocked from view, but I doubted it very much. I almost called him out on this too, in a burst of ill-timed bravery. But then I realized that if I did, he would know that the jig was up and would have nothing to lose. So I just closed and locked the door. Later that night, Lily was again knocked out and the kids were upstairs in bed. I didn't think I'd fall asleep. I, honest to God, was sitting there with a crowbar in my hands, on high alert, like I was about to be in a fight for my life. In hindsight, maybe it was a bit of an overreaction, but I wasn't going to be one of those idiots who dies because they underestimated a threat level. I might as well have suggested the kids and I split up, which of course I realized in that moment that was essentially what had happened. They wouldn't have been much help to me anyway. Well, actually Chris might have, because he was 14 and he was as tall as I was and could break a board with his fist. Maybe I should have kept him around. Anyway, eventually I did fall asleep for like half an hour, and I was awoken to the sound of an owl. I'm a really light sleeper, so either the owl hooting woke me up or else it was just a coincidence. But I heard the owl when I woke up. Only, it didn't sound quite right. It sounded almost like an owl, but something was off about it. As I look back on this now, what I did next was extraordinarily foolish given the events that had transpired that night. But I think my tired brain wasn't working fast enough. That's the real killer in horror movies: exhaustion. In my fatigued state, I decided to investigate. I went to the door and listened. The owl was still hooting, but it sounded so weird. I couldn't figure out why it sounded so off. And this is when I did another stupid thing. I opened the door. With the door open, I could hear the owl a little better, and I looked into the darkness, shining the light on my phone around. Suddenly, I heard the owl again, and I honest to God gasped because this was when it all came together. The hooting didn't sound like an actual owl. It sounded someone, a human, imitating an owl. For real, even recalling it for now, this story is giving me literal chills. Maybe it doesn't sound like a lot, but it was one of the truly terrifying experiences in my life the moment where I realized this. My heart was about to fucking pound right out of my chest, and I still had the beam of light from my phone pointed into the darkness. And that's when I saw it reflected off a set of eyes that were at the level a human's would be. And remember, this was 2007, so the light was total shit, which means the owner of the said eyes was uncomfortably close, though it was so dark outside that I couldn't make out anyone. I wasn't tired anymore. So I came to my senses. I locked that fucking door, barricaded it with a chair, and I retreated into the living room after checking all of the downstairs windows again. I also grabbed a big ass knife from the kitchen, like a Michael Myers style knife, because at this point, I legitimately thought that I might need it. I really contemplated calling the police, but what was I going to tell them? That someone outside was making owl noises and had eyes? They'd be like, "That's an owl, you idiot," and then probably hang up on me. So I just sat on the couch again, this time clutching the knife and crowbar both, and I tried not to think about all the horror stories that I had read or seen, especially the ones involving well-meaning babysitters meeting gruesome ends. But I was not successful, and I did not fall asleep again. Around midnight, the couple came home. I had texted them to kind of warn them, without sounding like I had completely lost any shred of cool that I had left. I just said that I thought that I heard someone outside, so be careful when they got home. They were totally unbothered because they lived in some bizarre world where bad things didn't ever happen to good people. They walked in nonchalantly while I put the knife away before they saw me clinging to it like a shipwrecked victim clings to any piece of floating debris they can find. And this was when they told me that they thought they had heard someone outside a few nights ago, because of course, this wasn't something you would tell your babysitter beforehand, right? I mean, why would I need to know that? So I took my very well-earned money, ran to my car, and I got the fuck out of there. Once I got home, I realized that I still had the crowbar, and I won't lie to you, I never brought it back. I mean, because of their critical omission of information, I lived what was very nearly an actual nightmare, so I earned that crowbar too. This was the end of my babysitting career. Only one other time did I babysit for them, and that was during a legit medical emergency one of the parents was having. I mean, I couldn't well turn them down when they called me in desperation. And nothing weird happened that night, thankfully, because I don't think that I would have the mental capacity to deal with this shit again. But you know, even all these years later, I know one thing with absolute certainty. That was not an owl. This happened while in my early 20s. My best friend was always getting into risky shit, and while she did various drugs, I was always more of a pothead. When they said pot was a gateway drug, I believe it's true to a certain extent with those who have addictive personalities, and she definitely developed an addiction issue later on. My friend, her name was KK, she was always down to meet people. She used to friend random people on Facebook or Instagram. She would ask me to hang out so that when she met people, I was the buffer just in case they didn't like each other. One day, she came over to my house unannounced and was like, "Hey, let's go to my uncle's house." Her aunt was there and her aunt had some goods. Her aunts happened to be down the road, and her aunt and her uncle were known as dealers in the area, and so we went. When we got there, she was like, "Hey, I met this guy online and he goes by Joey Crack." He then shows her aunt his pictures, and a wide-set man with a red goofy face, cornrow braids, face tattoos, and a gold grill. I laughed and I said, "Wow, okay, you really know how to pick them." She had already invited him over, so upon his arrival, he then comes out of nowhere and just walks right up and gives Kay a hug and everyone else there a kiss on the cheek. In this part of town, there was nothing around, just houses, a school, and some woods. The closest store was about 20 minutes away, So it struck me as odd that he walked here. So it was me, Kay, her aunt, and the aunt's friend, and we sit and get 3 joints in rotation. By this time, both aunts are high as a kite on coke. They take a few puffs and then go inside the house, leaving me, Kay, and Joey crack outside. Joey then starts asking us questions like how we know each other, what we do for a living, and other stuff. It was getting late, so I was telling her that I was going to go home. She was asking me not to go yet, and I told her that I was tired and that Joey is weird, and he kept low-key hitting on me. She then tells me he asked to sleep with her and he wanted her to ask if I was down. I laughed it off and I said that they were crazy. And after a while of silence, I deflected and I heard some noise that was in the darkness. After a bit of small talk between him and Kay, he then learned that neither of us was interested and that it was just a hangout. This then turns the mood and you can feel it. It was suddenly eerie quiet. He got reserved and shifty-eyed, and I sat down for a while just to please Kay. At one point, I then turned to Joey and asked, "What are you about to do? 'Cause I'm about to go home and Kay's coming with me." Remember, he walked here, and it was dark by now. He was like, "I just texted my boy and he's about to come get me." When he was texting, Kay was right behind him watching him text, and her eyes grew wide and she looked at me. Well, that was a silent girl code for, "Bitch, what the hell?" Kay then broke the silence and was like, "Hey, can you come and help me get this thing from inside? I need to bring it out." And so I did, and we went inside, and she was like, "I'm gonna call my uncle so he can take us to your place." I asked her why, since my house was only like a 10-minute walk away. She said that she was looking at Joey's text. He sent to whoever was coming to pick him up the information of all of us here. He noted that her aunts were high on coke and us along with our age. He was telling his boy to come over to basically rob and rape us. And then he called dibs on the blonde one. I was the blonde one. Every hair stood up on my body with the thought of some gross goon trying to have his way with me. And I was mad because she got me into this shit. We came back out and continued our conversation with him so he wouldn't get suspicious of us. She then mentions out loud that her uncle was on his way home. As he pulls in, a sigh of relief comes over me. They speak briefly, and Joey then departs into the darkness before his ride even shows up. Kay and I get a ride from her uncle to my house, and on the ride, we noted how weird Joey was. Later that night, as I was going to bed, I checked my Facebook and I have a friend request from Joey and also a message that says, "You're so pretty. I would love some alone time with you without your friend." This message ended with this number. I have never blocked someone so fast. After this, Kay didn't learn her lesson, but that's another story for another time. A week later, Joey was in the news, and he was wanted for sexual assault, robbery, and drug possession. A bullet well missed on my part. So Joey crack, let's never meet again. I've been a long-time lurker on a number of true scary story groups and platforms, and after reading all the horrifying things that everyone else went through, I thought that I should go ahead and share what happened to me in my senior year of high school. Well, I guess it didn't technically happen to me. It happened to my friend, whom we are going to call Lily for the sake of privacy, but it was a terrible situation, and I was definitely a part of it. It also involved an instructor at our high school, who we're just going to refer to as Mr. Smith. To set the stage a bit, Mr. Smith was a newer teacher at our school. Our senior year was his first year teaching at our school. He wasn't the youngest teacher, and he looked to be in his mid to late 30s. But he was charismatic and quickly became popular because he seemed to relate to us kids. He was one of those teachers that was in the know about pop culture and things that the students liked, and a lot of us students really adored him and his class. He was an English teacher, and he actually made the class engaging and entertaining. My friend Lily and I were in the same hour with Mr. Smith, and from the beginning I couldn't help but notice that Mr. Smith did seem to pay her an unusual amount of attention. At first, I thought that it was just him trying to help her out a bit extra in the class, and making sure that she was understanding things and not struggling, which I have seen before. However, there was one day that completely solidified all the suspicions that I had and made me see that the attention that Mr. Smith was giving to Lily was not innocent or professional. One day, at the end of the school day, I realized that I had accidentally forgotten to turn in an assignment for Mr. Smith's class, and I made a beeline to the room so that I could get it turned in. When I opened the door, I saw Mr. Smith and Lily in the room, and while they weren't doing anything obvious, the feeling of the room was definitely inappropriate. They were both clothed, obviously, but it was pretty clear to me that something was going on or being talked about that shouldn't be talked about in a classroom setting. I timidly entered the room and I handed my assignment to Mr. Smith. And as I did, he thanked me and said something like, "Anyways, Lily, if you need more help, we can set aside a time here in the future to figure things out." She said okay, and she actually walked out of the room with me. Obviously, I asked her what was that about, and she just shrugged it off, saying that he was helping her with homework. This was obviously a lie, but I didn't want to jump into conclusions. Maybe it was innocent, maybe nothing had happened, and I was just looking at it wrong. Yeah, those justifications were completely wiped from my mind as the next few days went on. After having walked in on whatever that was, I started noticing everything that pushed me into believing that it wasn't innocent. I noticed how much extra attention Mr. Smith would give to Lily. I noticed how close he would get to her, how much extra help he would give her in class, which required him to be right against her. How he would randomly say things like, "You look nice today, Lily." Things that would sound guiltless, small compliments and the like, but these virtuous compliments to me were anything but. Then it came to a head. About a month after I walked in on their situation, Lily came to me in tears after school. I was at my locker, getting my stuff together, and she tapped me on the shoulder. When I turned around, she was a mess. Her makeup was running, and she looked absolutely miserable. She asked me if I could give her a ride home, which was surprising to me. We'd always been friends, sure, but we weren't that close. I told her that I could, and then we made our way to my car. The way that she changed from in tears to sobbing uncontrollably the second the doors closed was horrible. She exploded into telling me about what was going on between herself and Mr. Smith. Basically, what I anticipated. She said that it wasn't anything serious, that he'd flirted with her, and that she reciprocated, but they hadn't gone any further than that. Until that day. That day, she had gone to his room to ask him about an assignment, to actually ask about schoolwork. Without going too far into the disturbing details, he pushed himself on her, and he definitely had gotten handsy. She said that she tried to push him away, but struggled with him, and said something like, "Oh, you know you want this as much as I do." She said that she reached up, slapped him, and that's when he finally let her go. She then ran away from the room and found me. Of course, my first thought was that we needed to report him. She agreed initially, but then mentioned that she didn't think anyone would believe her. She said that there was no one in the room. There were obviously no cameras in the classroom, and she was worried that she would be labeled as a liar or that people would claim that she was just trying to ruin him. We spoke about it a bit, and the conversation ended with her asking me to let her consider things for a couple of days before we did. For those few days, I genuinely tried to respect her wishes, but seeing how he was still making comments towards Lily and how he was still trying to get close to her during class, even when she was no longer showing interest in him, my conscience wouldn't let me stay silent. I couldn't help but shake this thought that he would go further and assault her again if they met in private, because it sounded like he was more than willing to escalate. So, I made a very difficult decision and I went to the administrators and reported Mr. Smith. I told them everything that Lily had told me, and I told them about when I walked in on them meeting. The administrator that I talked to took my statements very seriously. She asked me how certain I was of these allegations, stating that it was a very serious situation. I told her that I knew how serious it was. I told her that Lily had asked me to wait because she was scared that no one would believe her, but that I felt like I had to tell them. The investigation was actually a lot quicker than I expected. It turns out that Lily wasn't the only girl that Mr. Smith had targeted. During their short investigation, after talking with a few other students, there were actually 3 other girls that were willing to tell them about comments that Mr. Smith had made. One of them even told them that he had tried to go further with them a few months prior. As the evidence mounted, the school actually got the police involved, and one day after school, Mr. Smith was actually arrested for what he had done, and he was charged with multiple accounts of sexual misconduct. The whole school was definitely in shock as the news got around, and a lot of people felt betrayed by this guy. My friendship with Lily, however, was pretty much over. She was angry that I had gone behind her back and felt like I had taken away her control over the situation. I tried to explain that I did it to protect her and the others, but she couldn't see it that way. We drifted apart, and by the time we graduated, we were no longer friends. It's been a few years since then, and I still think often about Lily. I wonder if I had made the right choice, if I could have handled it differently, or if there was something more that I could have done to help her. But ultimately, I have to believe that getting a predator like Mr. Smith out of our school was worth the cost. This just happened yesterday. I will preface this with the fact that we are entering into building phase on our house right now. So, I am meeting a lot of contractors and new people. We have been having trouble finding someone to do our foundation. Over the last month, I have called tons of people who said that they can't do the job, but know someone who can. And then, they give me their number and name. I call, and I get the same answer, rinse and repeat. And after a lot of this, I finally land on the number of a guy named Joe. Joe sounded excited to do the job and was the most responsive and also nicest person that I've run into so far, contractor-wise. We set up a meet time and he came out to my place to see the site. He seemed confident that he could do the job. He then asked to take the plans home with him so he could go over them and said that he would get back to me with a quote soon. I agreed, gave him the plans, but I told him that I would need them back soon, and that was that. Not too long after, we met with a second contractor who we ultimately ended up hiring for the job. On Friday, I realized that Joe still had the plans, and it's coming time now that the first steps are about to happen and we needed the plans back. So I texted him. I said, "Hey Joe, would I be able to come and get those architectural plans from you?" He answered, "Yeah, I can stop by tomorrow." I then replied, "I can meet you in town if that's easier. I need to go to the store anyways." Joe then asked, "Okay, what time?" "Noon, at the grocery parking lot." And Joe replied that sounds good. Around noon yesterday, I arrived at the grocery store parking lot. I text Joe right away saying that I've arrived and he shows up soon after. He pulled up next to my car and then got out, and I get out as well and notice that he is empty-handed. Confused, I ask where the plans are and if he brought them. "Oh, no. They're back at my house. Do you need them?" I'm slightly annoyed at this point, so I just said yes, and that the guy who is prepping the site needs them. Joe responds with, "Oh, well, you can follow me back to my house and I will give them to you." I started to feel alert at this point. Nobody but my husband knows that I'm meeting this guy, and I really do not know him very well, so I asked him how far his house was. Joe said, 5 minutes, 4 miles. The weird vibes are growing the more that I think about it. Clearly nothing to write home about, but I am ready to get out of there at the drop of a hat if necessary. I said to Joe, "Let me call my husband. I may not have time because we need to be somewhere." Giving myself an easy out. I walk away out of earshot so I could think straight and call my husband. He thankfully answered, and I told him everything that happened so far. He agreed that it sounded a little shady and told me to be straight up with Joe and tell him that I wasn't comfortable going to his house. I then hung up. I walked back to where Joe was waiting and I said, "So I do have time, but I am not going to your house because I don't know you well enough. But I'll wait in the parking lot across from the fish factory. It's a very loud stink place that you couldn't miss." Joe seemed confused and didn't know where I was talking about. So after a bit of back and forth and trying to explain where I was going to wait, I offered to drive first and he could follow me. That way, he could see where I pulled into. And then he could continue to his house, grab the plans and then meet me back here. Also, I would mention that I was proud of myself because I tend to be a bit timid and too polite, to my own detriment sometimes. But this time, I did not beat around the bush, and I was clear and concise with everything that I said. Like, I had adopted laser focus in my delivery for once. I then got in my car, drove first, and Joe followed me and I pulled into the parking lot. I looked to make sure that Joe saw me, and I noticed that he had stopped in the middle of the empty street, and he is signaling for me to turn my car around. Since I'm a good distance away, I get out of my car so I can hear what he is saying, and he is yelling for me to turn around and follow him because his house is right there. I again said no, that I wasn't going to his house, and that I would wait right here for him to come back. A flash of annoyance went through him, but then he nods and continues down the street, leaving me there to wait for him to return. Less than 1 single minute later, he arrives back with the plans, hands them off to me. I quickly took them, said a quick goodbye, and I booked it out of there. After I got out of the situation, I was finally able to think and reflect. It took him less than 1 minute to get the plans from his house. So it's one of two things. If he lives so close, why didn't he know about the parking lot that I was talking about? He could probably see them from his house. Or he had the plans with him the whole time. Also, I think it's good to note that my husband and I tried looking him up after this, but there is nothing about Joe on the internet. He does not have an email, a business name, or registered phone number. I don't even remember who gave me his number. I now realize that aside from my husband, no one knows that I have been talking to or meeting with him. He simply doesn't exist as a contractor online, and since we never decided to use him as a contractor, I never officially looked him up until now.
And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared, because your fear feeds me.